I used to inspect buildings for occupancy violations, fire separations, unpermitted additions, dead alarms that property owners kept promising to fix next month. It was not a heroic job. It was clipboards, access panels, stained ceiling tiles, bad paperwork, and people lying to my face while I looked at the thing they were lying about. That kind of work changed the way I moved through a place. I stopped seeing walls first. I saw what ran inside them: power, air, water, egress, the weak parts, the concealed parts, the parts somebody hoped nobody would ask about. That was why I noticed the property when I came off the corridor and cut through the service roads north of the city. And it was probably the only reason I stayed alive long enough to get below it. The city was already failing by then, not in a movie way, not with sirens in every direction and helicopters overhead. It was worse because it happened in pieces. One intersection worked. The next one had cars jammed across 3 lanes with doors hanging open. One gas station still had people buying snacks and arguing over pump limits. The next one had a broken front window and blood smeared across the lottery machine. Dispatch channels kept talking about crowd control, medical surge, isolated violence, transport delays. Nobody on those channels sounded in control. They sounded tired, rushed, and careful with words that no longer matched what was happening. I had been sent out that morning to verify storm damage at 2 mixed-use buildings along the river corridor. By noon, the first building manager refused to let me leave through the lobby because a man in the parking lot had attacked a woman with no warning, and 3 more people had piled onto him before anyone understood what they were doing. By 1 o'clock, the hospital 1 mile south was on diversion and then off the radio. By 2 o'clock, I was in my county sedan with half a tank of gas, trying side streets because the freeway had stopped moving, and I had seen enough faces through windshields to know those people were not waiting for a tow truck. I had a backpack in the trunk with a flashlight, tape measure, pry bar, inspection tablet, 2 bottles of water, and a sandwich I never got around to eating. That was all. No rifle, no bug-out bag, no grand plan. I kept moving because sitting still inside that traffic felt wrong. Every few minutes, somebody pounded on another person's car window. Every few minutes, a door swung open and nobody got back in. The corridor north of the city ran past warehouses, private labs, data centers, fenced storage yards, all those low buildings with neutral names and expensive landscaping. I took an access road behind a medical distribution center, rolled past a guard shack with the gate arms snapped off, and cut uphill along a line of pines where the pavement narrowed to 2 cracked lanes. I remember seeing a campus sign set back from the road. Holbrook Field Research. Black letters on brushed steel. No company logo, no website. Just a phone number and a warning about restricted access. The sign looked too clean for the rest of the day. That bothered me enough to slow down. The property fence was 8 feet high with anti-climb panels on the inside, not chain link, welded mesh. The camera poles were set farther back than usual and the lenses were caged. The retaining wall on the east side was poured concrete faced with stone veneer, but the wall was thicker than it needed to be for the grade. I could tell from the drain outlets. There were too many, and 2 of them were not drains at all. They were vent grills dressed to look like drains. Stainless steel recessed into dark sleeves. The kind of thing you do when you want a system to breathe without advertising that something large is buried behind the hill. I drove another 100 yards before I saw the first body on that road. A grounds worker lay face down near a utility cart with 1 shoe missing and a ring of access badges clipped to his belt. I did not stop for him. I looked in the mirror, saw movement at the bend behind me. and kept going until I reached a service turnout partly hidden by cedars. There was a maintenance annex there. 1 story, flat roof, no windows on the back wall, and a loading door painted the same beige as everything else. The lot beside it held 3 company pickups and a small forklift. All 4 vehicles were still parked straight between the lines. That told me people had left fast and on foot. I killed the engine, listened, and heard almost nothing. Wind in the trees, a loose sheet metal flap tapping somewhere uphill, and then one bad sound from down the road. Shoes scuffing pavement in a stop-start rhythm that was too fast and too uncoordinated. I stepped out, grabbed my pry bar, took my backpack, and crossed the lot at a walk that kept threatening to turn into a run. The annex had an exterior keypad by the personnel door, card reader dead, no display. The door itself was latched but not fully shut. There were scrape marks on the threshold and a dark smear along the push bar. I eased it open, went inside, and caught the smell of bleach, hot dust, and something spoiled under the chemicals. The place had a front office with 2 desks, a break table, and a hallway leading to a loading bay. Papers were on the floor, not everywhere, just in a trail from one desk to the hall. Somebody had emptied a filing drawer in a hurry. I made it 5 steps down that hallway before a man came around the corner and hit the opposite wall hard enough to leave a mark. He wore a polo with the property name stitched over the chest, and one sleeve was wet to the elbow. He did not speak. He saw me, jerked sideways, and came at me with both hands out, fingers opening and closing as he crossed the tile. I backed up once, twice, then swung the pry bar into his knee. He folded into the wall, but kept coming from the floor. I hit him again in the side of the head, because there was no room to retreat, and because whatever he was doing had nothing to do with pain anymore. After the 3rd blow, he stopped moving. I stood over him for a second, then stepped around him and kept going because the sound of my own hitting would bring more. The loading bay doors were shut, but the far wall had a freight platform that did not fit the size of the annex. It was too clean, too deep, and the warning signs used internal wayfinding language instead of shipping language. Decon materials, access control. Level B, not basement, not storage. Level B. I looked at the floor rails and the recessed hydraulic lips and realized it was not a loading dock at all. It was a disguised freight elevator built to take pallets or gurneys or both. A security door stood beside the platform. Heavy frame, magnetic lock, panic hardware, still powered because the indicator above it glowed red. That was the first live light I had seen in an hour. I checked the office for an emergency binder, found a wall cabinet behind the front desk, and inside it found a manual crank release key zip-tied to a clipboard. Whoever built the place believed in backup procedures. That made sense. Places like that always did. The scuffing outside came closer. Then I heard the annex door bang once, twice, and stay open. I did not waste another second. I jammed the release key into the side plate, leaned on it until the lock clicked, shoved through the security door, and pulled it closed behind me just as something hit the other side with enough force to rattle the frame. The stairwell beyond dropped much farther than a basement stairwell had any right to drop. I counted landings without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4, then stopped because the number no longer helped. The walls were poured concrete, the air cooler with each turn, and every few flights there was a painted stripe and a letter marking. B, C, D. By the time I reached E, I understood the scale of what I was walking into. Nobody built stairs like that under a private field lab, unless the thing below mattered more than the thing above. At the bottom, I found a decontamination vestibule the size of a small clinic lobby. Emergency lights washed everything in a flat white glow. There were benches, wall dispensers, sealed bins, a row of lockers, and beyond the inner glass I could see a reception desk with a security partition and a hallway branching in both directions. A digital sign above the glass flashed one message over and over: "Lockdown status active. Remain in assigned sector." I stood there with one hand on the push bar and watched the sign cycle 3 times before I moved. There were no bodies in the vestibule, no blood, no discarded masks. The room looked cleaned and reset. That was wrong in a way I did not yet have words for. Inside the reception area, the silence got heavier. The air system was running, not full blast, but enough for a steady background hum. A monitor bank behind the desk showed camera feeds from corridors, stairwells, green grow lights over long hydroponic beds, and an exterior shot of the annex I had just entered. On that feed, 2 infected were wandering the lot in narrow circles, drawn by nothing I could hear from below. Seeing them on a camera instead of through glass made the whole situation look controlled for about 1 second, and then worse, because the camera meant somebody had built all this to keep watching the outside after the world stopped behaving. The desk drawers were open. The nearest keyboard was missing. Card access lanyards had been cut from their clips. Whatever records should have been there were gone. I did what I had done in every unfamiliar building for years. I built a mental map starting from the life safety spine. Reception in the center, main corridors east and west, stair at north, another at south, ventilation trunk above the ceiling, bulkhead doors every 100 feet, color stripes on the floor for departments, blue for residential, green for medical, yellow for operations, red for security. The place was laid out to keep movement organized under stress. That alone told me this was not a rich man's hobby bunker with leather chairs and canned beans. This was an institution designed for long-term occupation. I did not start exploring right away. First, I needed one room I could secure, water, and a better idea of who or what else was down there. I took the blue corridor because living quarters usually meant smaller rooms with simpler locks. 20 yards in, I found a dorm cluster with 6 compact sleeping rooms around a shared wash area. 4 doors stood open. 1 was shut. I checked each in turn with the pry bar ready. Empty beds, stripped lockers, a duffel half-packed on the floor, a children's drawing of a dog taped inside one wardrobe. The closed room was locked from the inside. I knocked once with my knuckle. No response. I left it alone. The shared bathroom had running water. I let the sink go for a full minute before I trusted it enough to drink. It was cold and tasted faintly metallic, but it was clear. I drank until the bottle in my hand was empty, filled both bottles from my pack, then checked every vent and ceiling corner in the dorm for cameras. There were none. Good. I dragged 2 metal wardrobes against the corridor side wall of the room farthest from the entry, set the mattress on the floor away from the door, and made that room mine for the next hour. Then I heard a voice. Not live, recorded, calm. Female, clean studio diction. Attention residents, internal movement remains restricted. Return to your assigned sectors and await clearance. Medical review will continue by schedule. The message repeated once in full, then cut off mid-sentence. After that, there was only static for 3 seconds and silence again. I sat on the edge of that dorm mattress and listened to the silence that followed. The message was too polished to help. Whoever recorded it had not been trapped when she did it. She had been reading from a script in a room with no panic in it yet. I went back out with the pry bar in one hand and the inspection tablet in the other, even though the tablet had no service and less than 40% battery. Old habit. I took pictures of wayfinding signs, room numbers, panel labels, not because I expected the cloud to save any of it, but because documenting a place forced my brain to stay useful. The residential wing opened into a commons area with bolted dining tables, a kitchenette, storage cabinets, and a rec room no one had been using when everything stopped. Board games still on a shelf. 2 treadmills, a shelf of paperbacks. On one table, somebody had left a handwritten meal roster under a plastic clip. The last completed entry was breakfast for 82 persons. The next line was blank. 82 people. That number changed the air around me. A shelter that held 82 adults, and maybe children, should not feel that empty unless something organized had happened to make it empty. Beyond the commons, I found the first bulkhead. Half-inch steel, motorized track, viewing slit, manual wheel. It was open. Somebody had wedged the threshold sensor with a folded packet from the cafeteria. I crouched and pulled it out. Fruit cup, peach. Best by date 6 months away. So the shutdown had been recent. Recent enough that the food cycle still belonged to the old world. Green corridor beyond the bulkhead. Medical. I stopped there because the first thing I saw was a gurney on its side and a blood trail disappearing through a pair of double doors labeled Isolation Suite. One of the doors had been chained shut from the outside. The chain links were fresh, hardware store galvanized steel, not part of the original build. Somebody had improvised that after the place was already occupied. I did not go in. Not then. I marked the door location in my notes and backed away. The operations sector on the yellow line was what sold me on staying below instead of gambling on the roads again. There was a central plant room with pressure gauges still in the green, filtration housings the size of fuel tanks, a water treatment rack, battery cabinets, and a control panel that showed power being drawn from 3 sources: battery bank, diesel microturbine, and rooftop solar. I stared at that screen longer than I care to admit. It was not endless power. It was not magic. But it was real infrastructure, maintained recently enough to still carry load. A clipboard hung beside the panel with a log sheet. Most pages were gone. The remaining sheet had only 6 entries, all in the same block lettering: airflow balancing, nutrient reservoir check, generator oil pressure, waste compactor jam. The dates covered 3 days and then stopped. Whoever removed the pages had done it neatly, tearing them from the top rings without ripping the cardboard backing. That was not panic. That was evidence management. I was standing there reading the last entry when I heard something metallic fall in the next room. I killed my flashlight even though the overheads were on, stepped behind a bank of filters, and waited. There it was again. Not a random vibration this time. Careful movement, somebody touching tools and trying not to. Human. I tightened my grip on the pry bar and said the first stupid thing that came to mind. I'm not infected. Silence. Then a woman's voice from behind the duct chase. Rough, dry, controlled. That is what an infected person never says. The answer was so ordinary it almost made me laugh. I did not. I said, "Former county inspector." Came in through the surface annex. I'm alone. Set the bar down first. It's a pry bar. Then set the pry bar down first. I lowered it to the floor with 2 fingers and pushed it away with my boot. A few seconds later, she stepped out from behind the filter bank, holding a utility knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair tied back with a cable tie. Company coveralls unzipped at the collar. One knee wrapped in gray tape over a blood-stained bandage that looked old enough to worry me. She stayed 10 feet away and kept the knife up. "Name," she said. "Gavin Mercer." She looked me over. Backpack, county work shirt, the dirt on my sleeves, and nodded once. "Claire Duval." "You work here?" "Worked above it. Greenhouse systems contractor. Mostly nutrient delivery and lighting arrays. I knew the lower levels existed. I didn't know it went this deep until 3 days ago. 3 days. So the place had failed fast. Claire did not lower the knife until I rolled both sleeves up and let her inspect my forearms under her flashlight. I did the same when I asked about her knee. She showed me the bandage without complaint. Bruising, split skin, no bite marks. She said she had slammed it in a hatch on the way down. Her face gave nothing away except exhaustion and the effort of staying pointed in one direction. We kept the first conversation short because both of us understood that standing in an open plant room talking was a bad way to survive. She had entered from a service tunnel linking the greenhouse block to the lower utility spine. She had seen staff and families rush underground before public closure orders hit. She had not been on the access list. When violence started in the main lab upstairs, security stopped checking identities and started checking contamination. She slipped in behind a spill team, got separated during an alarm, and spent most of the last 2 days moving between service spaces because the people running the facility had begun sealing sections with occupants still inside. That part made me stop writing in my notes and look up. Sealing because of infected? Sealing because of infected and because of people. She wiped a streak of grime from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "You'll see." Claire already had a hide space in a maintenance crawl above the filtration room. She had water from an auxiliary tap, a blanket, 2 protein bars, and a socket wrench set. I had dorm space, more water, and a better route back to the entry. Neither of us liked the idea of giving up our own position, so we did the normal thing. We compromised because being stubborn underground gets a person killed faster than being generous. We spent the next 2 hours moving her supplies to the dorm cluster in 3 quick trips. No talking unless we had to, stopping at every intersection to listen. She knew which doors required cards and which had maintenance releases. I knew how to read the building's habits from the signs above us. Between the 2 of us, the place stopped feeling like a maze and started feeling like a system built by humans, which meant it could be understood and worked around. That first evening underground, if it was evening, time already felt wrong down there. We inventoried what we could reach without forcing locked doors. Dry food in the residential pantry for maybe 2 weeks, if 2 people were careful. Bottled supplements in the medical nutrition room. Water treatment functional. Battery reserve healthy. Laundry still online. A hydroponics control room feeding 4 grow bays on automatic cycles. No firearms in the obvious security cabinet. Only pepper foam canisters, flex cuffs, and shock batons with charging docks. The place had expected compliance longer than combat. We also found 3 dead people before we finished the first sweep. One in a bathroom stall with an empty blister pack and a medical wristband. One security guard face down in the west stair landing with a crushed radio under his shoulder. One older man in a premium suite off the upper residential gallery, expensive luggage stacked by the door, dress shoes lined beneath the bed, throat cut cleanly with a disposable scalpel laid beside his hand. None of those deaths had happened by accident. None of them were fresh enough to still be moving. We closed the doors and kept going. When we reached the main surveillance room off operations, the monitors told us more in 10 seconds than the empty corridors had told us in hours. Roughly half the cameras were still live. Surface feeds showed the research property above us. Parking lots, greenhouse glass, service roads, and the tree line beyond the fence. No movement near the main lab. A group of infected clustered at the front pedestrian gate, drawn to something metallic banging loose in the wind. 2 cameras inside the lower complex showed locked sectors with lights on and nobody moving. Another showed a cafeteria corridor with trays overturned and one body near the vending machines. A 4th camera, labeled South Dorm C, showed a bulkhead door shut with scratches on the inside viewport and a rolling cart jammed against it. Claire stepped closer to the monitor wall without speaking. After a while, she pointed at the label strip under that feed. "Worker housing," she said. "Not for the investors." I looked at her. "Investors?" She gave a dry half-laugh with no humor in it. "You think this was built for field botanists?" That was when the shelter's shape finally came into focus. The premium suites, the separate dining room I had not entered yet, the restricted elevator codes, the private medical wing, the absence of branding on the property sign, all of it lined up. Some private research group had built an underground continuity complex beneath a legal cover operation. Not a public shelter. Not even a corporate emergency bunker in the ordinary sense. This had been reserved for a selected population long before the streets started filling with abandoned cars. We took turns sleeping that cycle because nobody sane sleeps hard in a place with locked doors and missing records. I rested first with the dorm door blocked by a wardrobe and Claire in the wash area outside with the shock baton charging at her feet. Every 20 minutes I woke to check whether the light under the door had changed. It never did. When I took my turn on watch, I sat by the corridor with the baton in my lap and read everything I could find in the dorm binders. Most of the pages were boring. Laundry schedule, waste segregation rules, water use notices. Then I found a resident conduct sheet printed on thick stock and slid into a clear sleeve. Extended occupancy requires strict adherence to allocation directives. Access to restricted amenities will be based on sponsorship tier and operational role. Sponsorship tier. There it was in plain text. The place had been built to save human life, but not all human life equally. The next cycle, morning by the kitchen clock, we went after information. The main admin office off reception had 3 workstations stripped of their drives and a server rack with the primary units removed. Somebody had not only taken digital records, somebody had known exactly which units mattered. The paper archive cabinets had been emptied except for legal boilerplate and maintenance schematics. Most of that would have been worthless to anyone trying to hide names, but not to me. Schematics were enough. Building plans always said more than the people who carried them. Spread across a table in the rec room, those plans gave us a clearer picture. 3 residential classes, general dorms in blue sectors A through D, premium suites in blue sectors P1 and P2, medical core with negative pressure isolation and a surgical bay. Hydroponics wing feeding 2 produce rooms, 1 algae processing room, and a seed vault. Operations with water treatment and power. Security hub adjacent to a vehicle tunnel marked emergency egress only. There was also a lower service level under everything else, crawl space in some parts, full-height utility corridors in others. That lower level was the key. In any hardened complex, the pipes and cables tell the truth about how the fancy spaces above really work. Claire found the first sign that someone was still actively controlling part of the facility while I was tracing the utility map. Lights in the West Medical Corridor went out, came back, then locked to red emergency mode, even though no alarm sounded. 30 seconds later, the surveillance feed from that corridor cut to black. Not failed. Cut. Cleanly. We looked at each other, and neither of us wasted time pretending that was a coincidence. Someone had power somewhere. Someone had access to the control network. And whoever it was had chosen not to contact us until then. We armed ourselves better before moving again. Pepper foam on my belt, shock baton in my right hand, utility knife from the kitchen in my pocket. Claire took the second baton and a fire extinguisher because she said a full canister made a good last argument in a corridor. Then we went west toward medical. Not because it was smart to chase the unknown, but because if somebody could shut cameras and lights, leaving that person in control was worse. The isolation suite door I had seen earlier was no longer chained. The chain lay on the floor in a neat coil beside the wall. That told me whoever had moved it was not frantic. He had taken it down carefully. The room beyond was a short corridor with 6 patient rooms on one side and observation glass on the other. 3 room doors stood open. 1 was shut. 2 hung broken from their upper hinges. We found the first moving infected in room 4. A nurse, or what had been a nurse, still wore scrub pants and 1 glove. She was on the floor under the bed frame when Claire's flashlight swept the room. The moment the beam hit her, she crawled out fast enough to slam shoulder first into the wall and come at us low. Claire emptied half the extinguisher into her face without waiting for my signal. The white burst blinded her for half a second. I stepped in and drove the baton into the side of her neck on instinct. The current threw her against the cabinet. She kept coming. I hit her again in the jaw with the metal end until she stopped trying to get up. We stood there in the powder haze, looking at the room around her, wrist restraints attached to the bed rails, monitoring leads torn free, a chartboard with the patient name strip removed. On the floor near the sink, a stack of forms partly burned in a stainless tray. Somebody had tried to destroy records in place and been interrupted before finishing. Claire picked 1 page up with 2 fingers. "Exposure review," she said. "No name, no date. Just symptom progression." I checked the locked room at the end of the corridor. Through the small glass window, I saw 2 gurneys and a body bag, unzipped across the chest. Inside the bag, the occupant's hands had been zip-tied together. I backed away from that door and left it shut. Medical gave us 2 useful things besides trouble. One was a rolling case of antibiotics, dressings, pain tablets, and antiseptics we could carry. The other was a wall terminal in the nurse station that still had local power. Its login screen rejected random passwords, but taped under the keyboard was an old shortcut note with 1 admin override string written by hand. Lazy staff save lives in strange ways. The override did not get us into the main network. It did give us access to recent print jobs stored in the local memory buffer. There were 12. 11 were blank cover sheets or maintenance requests. The 12th was a triage directive with the header removed. In event of confirmed behavioral contamination within sealed occupancy, preserve ventilation integrity, restrict movement between sponsorship classes, Transition non-essential residents to dorm quarantine pending review. Transition non-essential residents. That was the kind of wording people used when they wanted a sentence to sound less ugly than the thing it meant. While I copied the print buffer to my tablet by taking pictures off the screen, Claire opened a supply closet and found a plastic tote shoved behind linen packs. Inside were resident badges cut in half. Dozens of them, sorted by color lanyard. Blue dorm, green staff, silver premium. Somebody had disabled identities in bulk and hidden the evidence. Her mouth went flat when she looked at the silver stack. Very few. We did not stay in medical after that. The place had too many corners and too much history. We hauled what we could and pulled back to operations. Halfway there, every speaker in the corridor clicked once. Then a man's voice came through, live this time. Older, even, with the practiced control of someone used to making decisions for other people. If you can hear this, return to reception and await processing. Unauthorized movement will trigger sector restrictions. Claire stopped so suddenly the extinguisher almost slipped from her hand. She stared at the nearest speaker grill. I stepped in front of her without thinking and said, "Who are you?" A pause, then, "Security Director Kress. Identify yourselves." I said nothing for a second because the title told me almost everything I needed. Not just a guard. The guard in charge. The person with keys, camera control, and whatever version of the official story still survived down there. Claire answered before I could stop her. "You sealed people in South Dorm." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Return to reception," he said again. "This facility remains under contamination protocol. The speakers went dead. We did not go to reception. Instead, we went the other direction entirely. Down into the lower service chase through a maintenance hatch Claire had used before. If Kress controlled the formal corridors, we needed the ugly spaces beneath them. The hatch opened behind a janitor closet and dropped us onto a graded catwalk over pipe runs and cable trays. It smelled of coolant, warm dust, and nutrient water. The ceiling was low enough in places that I had to bend. No cameras, no comfort. That was perfect. Service-level travel slowed everything down, but gave us something better than speed. It gave us privacy. We crawled under the premium suites, past the underside of the med wing, below the operations floor toward South Dorm, following Claire's memory of the utility branches and my reading of the plan set. Every few hundred feet, there was an access ladder or a removable ceiling panel into the occupied sectors above. More than once we stopped and listened through the steel. Once we heard nothing. Once we heard a ventilation fan cycling. Once, above South Dorm, we heard hands hitting a locked door in irregular bursts, followed by a sound that had once been a voice. The access panel into South Dorm C had been bolted shut from above. I removed the hinge pins with the pry bar and a screwdriver from Claire's pocket, while she held the flashlight between her teeth. When the panel came loose, stale air rolled down through the gap. Not rotten enough to make the room unusable, but close. We climbed into a corridor lined with 12 worker rooms and one common wash area. Emergency lights still worked. 7 room doors were open. 3 were shut. 1 had been smashed inward. The first room held 2 bunks and 3 people. All dead. Not infected. Not moving. 1 had a blanket over her face. 1 had dried blood at the nose and no other visible injury. The third still held a paper cup in one hand. In the wash area sink, somebody had written on the mirror with red marker, "We were never on the list." Claire leaned both hands on the counter and stared at the message long enough that I had to check the corridor behind us twice. When she finally turned away, she did it with the kind of care people use when they do not trust what their face might show if they move too fast. The common room at the end of the dorm gave us the rest. There was a vent control cabinet there with a manual override handle bent nearly off. Beside it lay 3 disposable oxygen masks and a printed maintenance sheet. Carbon dioxide levels elevated in sector. Increase exchange pending command authorization. The authorization line was never signed. It did not take genius to understand it. Somebody had cut ventilation to quarantine the dorm, maybe for infection, maybe for containment of a panic, and then left the people inside waiting while the air got worse. Some had turned before the rest were even dead. That was why the bulkhead door on the camera feed had scratches on the inside. Those people had not been protected. They had been written off. I photographed everything: mirror, vent cabinet, sheet. Bodies only from a distance because I wanted the record without turning grief into a trophy. Claire found an access badge under one bunk that had not been cut in half. Facilities support. Name: Naomi Duval. She held it in her palm without saying a word. Then she put it in her chest pocket and said, "My sister cleaned here twice a week." I did not ask any of the useless questions. I knew the answers already or had no right to them. We kept moving because staying in that dorm any longer would not help her sister and would probably kill us. Kress knew by then that we were not obeying him. Lights in the sector ahead went red again. A bulkhead we needed for the return route started closing with a motor whine that carried through the walls. Claire took off at a limping run and wedged the extinguisher into the track with both hands while I spun the emergency release wheel. The door bucked once, then stopped 6 inches from the frame. We squeezed through and dropped back into the service chase before he could lock another one. From then on, it turned into a contest between his access and our patience. He killed corridor lights to hurt us. We used maintenance lamps and kept low. He shut camera feeds in sections when he thought we were there. We changed routes and watched where he blacked out next. He triggered one speaker after another with the same controlled line about contamination protocol. We stopped listening after the 3rd time because any man still repeating protocol after leaving dozens sealed behind doors was not protecting a facility. He was protecting himself. Late in that cycle, while tracing a fiber line toward the security hub on the plan, I found the one thing Kress had missed in his cleanup: a local backup cabinet mounted behind a removable wall in the print room off operations. Not a server, not enough storage for everything, just a mirrored emergency cache for critical logs in case the main network failed. The lock was keyed. The key was gone. The cabinet door opened anyway after 5 minutes with a screwdriver because the builder had installed the wrong screws on the hinge plate. Again, laziness saved lives. Inside were 4 data cartridges, one labeled airflow, one water, one incident, one access. The room had an old standalone reader terminal. It took 2 tries to power on. When it did, the access cartridge opened first because it was smallest. The record only covered the last 36 hours before the mirror stopped receiving updates, but it was enough. Entry events, badge scans, manual overrides, bulkhead closures, sector lockouts, medical quarantine requests, emergency egress prep. Names on most lines had been scrubbed, but not titles. Security director, residency coordinator, medical lead, facilities chief. It read like a machine version of a disaster nobody had planned to admit. At 1942, on day 1, all premium suite residents were reassigned to secure gallery P2. At 1951, South Dorm C ventilation lowered to quarantine minimum. At 2003, facilities override request denied. At 2017, medical isolation room 4 restraint failure. At 2022, dorm sectors A and C locked. At 2046, resident disturbance in commons. At 2052, lethal force authorization requested. At 2054, authorized. Claire looked away before I scrolled further. I kept going because once a person opens the record, closing it does not make him cleaner. Incident was worse. Short-typed summaries only. Resident conflict over access eligibility. Staff refusal to surrender family members at triage. Behavioral contamination observed following undocumented exposure in security transfer team. Partial breach of isolation. Population stabilization measures enacted by command. Population stabilization. That phrase sat on the screen with all the weight in the world and none of the honesty. One summary had an attached audio note that still played. A man, younger than Cress, breathing hard but still trying to sound professional. This is facilities chief Orr. Command has cut airflow to worker sectors and suspended med support to general dorms. I am logging objection. If anyone reviews this later, know that we still had capacity. We still had water. We still had beds. This is not triage. This is selection. The recording ended with shouting in the background and something metallic striking the wall. Claire pressed both palms flat against the reader table until her knuckles paled. "We need control," she said. "Now." She was right. As long as Cress had the command room, he could erase the rest, gaslight the story, or kill us with the systems. We stopped collecting and started planning. The security hub sat on the red sector behind 2 carded doors and 1 bullet-resistant control vestibule. Going through the formal corridor would be suicide unless he was asleep, stupid, or dead. So we looked lower. The vehicle tunnel on the blueprint ran under security and linked to a motor pool chamber with maintenance access along the drainage trench. If Cress planned to leave, or if he had already staged an escape, that was where he would have to go. Security people always think in exits. I had inspected enough facilities to know that the real power in a building sat closest to the route out. We used the lower service path again, deeper this time, through a drainage trench with removable grates and sump pumps humming below us. At one bend, the trench widened, and I saw tire marks in the dust on the concrete shoulder. Recent, straight line, narrow wheelbase. A utility cart or small electric transport had come through since the dust settled from the first chaos. Cress had been moving between sectors without using the monitored corridors. The motor pool access door was half open when we reached it. Light spilled under the threshold. Not emergency white. Warmer. Someone had turned on local work lamps inside. I whispered for Claire to stay off the center line, and we eased up to the gap. Through it, I could see a chamber big enough for 4 vehicles and a service lift platform beside a steel ramp leading to an outer blast door. 2 electric carts stood charging by the wall. A black utility vehicle idled near the ramp with its rear hatch open. Cases were stacked in the back. Medical coolers, water packs, paper archive boxes. A man in gray security armor was tightening cargo straps with both hands. Cress was older than I expected. Late 50s, maybe. Thick through the shoulders, hair gone white at the temples, face clean-shaven and ordinary. That was the worst part. He did not look like a monster. He looked like the kind of man who could have explained evacuation procedure at a board meeting while everybody took notes. He had a pistol on his hip and a radio clipped to his vest. When he turned for another case, Claire's boot shifted on the dust and made the smallest scrape in the world. He heard it anyway. His hand was on the pistol before I finished saying his name. "Don't!" I said, stepping through the door with the shock baton up. "Don't make this stupid!" He drew halfway, saw Claire behind me with the extinguisher nozzled toward his face, and stopped. His eyes moved once from me to her to the open door behind us. "You opened South Dorm," I said. "I secured this complex," he answered. "You suffocated people. I prevented cross-sector collapse." He said it flat, not angry, not ashamed, the way a person says a job title. Behind me, I heard Claire let out one short breath through her nose. That was all. I moved another step in. There were 82 at breakfast. There were 82 names on the roster, he said, not 82 viable residents. That told me everything about how he had survived long enough to stand there. He had never stopped sorting human beings into categories once it became useful. Claire spoke before I could. Naomi Duval. Facilities support. Was she viable? He looked at her with no flicker of recognition. That made it worse than if he had smiled. "I don't know the name." "No," she said. "You wouldn't." Kress shifted his stance a fraction toward the vehicle. His right hand had eased away from the pistol but closer to the driver door. He was judging distance. So was I. "This facility is compromised," he said. "You have no idea how many exposures occurred." "I know enough," I said. "You know fragments. You don't know what arrived at the gate that first night. You don't know what the transfer team brought down from the city." He tapped one finger against the archive boxes in the vehicle. "Those records explain the decisions. Then leave them and back away." No. The pistol came out fast after that. Faster than I was ready for. He brought it up, and I threw the baton more than swung it. It struck his wrist and knocked the shot into the ceiling. Claire fired the extinguisher at the same time. White blast filled the space between us. Kress cursed and stumbled sideways into the vehicle door. I ran through the cloud blind and hit him low in the ribs. We both went into the concrete lip of the ramp hard enough to scrape skin off my forearm through the sleeve. The pistol clattered away under the cart chargers. He shoved at my face with one arm and reached for a knife on his vest with the other. I trapped his wrist against the floor and drove my knee into his shoulder until the knife dropped. He was stronger than I wanted him to be. Age had not softened him much. He rolled, nearly threw me off, and got one hand around my throat for half a second before Claire smashed the extinguisher cylinder into the back of his head. He went flat. Not dead. Just empty for the moment. Claire stood over him with both hands on the canister handle, looking down at his body in a way that made me think she might hit him again until there was nothing left to say. Instead, she took one step back, bent over once with hands on thighs, then straightened and said, "Cable ties." We bound his wrists and ankles with charging leads from the wall hooks. He came around while I was kicking his knife away. The first thing he did was check whether the vehicle keys were still in his pocket. That would have been funny anywhere else. I dragged a shop stool over and sat in front of him while Claire searched the vehicle. Cases of antibiotics, water filters, seed stock, paper files, 2 laptops, a hard drive caddy wrapped in foam. He had been packing the history of the place along with the things needed to outlive it. "You were running?" I said. I was preserving continuity. From who? From witnesses who would not understand command decisions made under contamination. That was the sentence. The cleanest summary of the whole place. Not just saving himself. saving the version of events in which he had been necessary. Claire held up one of the archive boxes. Look at the labels. Inside were resident intake forms, medical screening waivers, sponsorship contracts, and a stack of printed messages never sent. Some were from parents to children in other sectors. Some were complaints about ventilation. Some were direct accusations written in shaking pen on clinic forms. One simply read, "You locked the wrong people out." There was also a sealed envelope marked Executive Contingency. I opened it because I was done respecting anyone's privacy in that hole. Inside was a letter signed by Dr. Elias Werner, director of Holbrook Continuity Initiative. The language was corporate and cold all the way through. In essence, if behavioral contamination exceeded medical containment and population exceeded sustainable long-haul thresholds, operational preservation would prioritize core sponsors, technical leads, and heritage dependents. Everyone else was to be managed by quarantine, sedation, or exclusion. It had all been written down before the first screaming started on the roads. Claire read the signature block, folded the letter once, and put it back in the envelope with a steadiness that looked harder than rage. Cress spoke again from the floor. "You think you would have done better?" I looked at him. "I think I wouldn't have built a place where rich people ate first and janitors got stale air. You're alive in it." That landed because it was partly true. I was alive because the structure had held, the filters had run, the water still came out clear, and the bulkheads still locked. The shelter itself had worked. The people at the top had failed inside something strong enough to keep them alive if they had treated each other like residents instead of inventory. I did not answer him right away. I went to the motor pool control panel instead. It had security camera routing, blast door status, and a layout of the command suite overhead. One biometric door between us and the central console. Cress's own print would open it. He refused at first. Claire solved that by rolling his bound body onto the cold concrete and leaving him there while we unpacked the files and read in front of him. 20 minutes later, he gave me the thumb without another speech. The command suite looked less dramatic than I expected. One long console, communication rack, access server, coffee gone stale in a mug, and a wall of monitors showing the whole complex. Cress had been living there in shifts. Cot in the corner, packaged meals, sink full of shaving stubble. On the center screen, an internal dashboard summarized occupancy by sector. Every active sector showed 0 except Security Command and our own general dorm cluster, which had been listed as unknown. He had known where we were. He had just waited to see whether we would kill what remained of ourselves, trying to understand the place. The recovered hard drive caddy from his vehicle slotted into the server dock. That gave us the rest. Video clips from day one showed families arriving before public lockdown, some in business clothes, some carrying children asleep on shoulders, some already arguing with guards at intake. Separate lanes, separate badges, separate waiting rooms. Hours later, another clip showed staff from the greenhouse and support buildings being herded toward worker dorms after screening because their names were not on the residency list. Cress appeared in several angles, calm, directing traffic, one hand always near someone else's shoulder without quite touching. Then came the transfer team from the city, 3 security contractors and 2 medical staff bringing in sealed crates, and 1 injured man on a stretcher. The metadata flagged the intake as confidential. 41 minutes after their arrival, the first medical emergency logged in isolation room 4. The rest of the record was not one clean timeline. It was fragments. A parent in general dorm demanding access to the premium gallery, where her son had been reassigned with a sponsor family. A facilities group pounding on the med desk because one of their own had collapsed in South Dorm. A residency coordinator telling Cress over comms that non-core occupancy could not keep drawing on primary stores if conditions became indefinite. Or the facilities chief from the audio log, shouting that airflow cuts would kill people faster than infection. Then the order, signed by Werner and executed by command, population stabilization measures. The infected outside had ended the city. The people inside had finished the shelter. Claire sat in the command chair for a long minute without touching anything. Then she opened the full door control menu and started unlocking every sector that could be opened safely without dropping a moving infected into our path. We did it slowly, one corridor at a time. Cameras first, then doors, then physical verification. Some sectors held only empty rooms. Some held bodies. One held 2 infected behind a jammed supply cart that we dealt with using the shock batons and distance. The premium gallery held 3 suites in order and 1 dead sponsor couple in formal dining clothes, seated upright at a table set for a meal they never finished. Cress had not saved them either. In the end, he had mostly saved files and himself. It took us 2 full cycles to bring the complex under our control. We shut off the recorded announcements. We rerouted cameras to all approaches. We restored normal airflow to every section still worth inhabiting, and sealed the ones that were not. We moved the dead where we could do it with dignity, and closed what we could not yet face. The lower incinerator existed, but Claire and I left it unused that first week. We were not ready to feed more human history into another machine built for convenience. We also did the practical work, because grief does not keep a water system balanced. Hydroponics needed attention immediately. One nutrient pump had cavitated dry and burned out its seal. Claire rebuilt it from spares while I flushed a clogged filter line and reprimed the reservoir loop. The algae tanks were overgrown and useless for now, but the produce beds still held lettuce, herbs, dwarf tomatoes, and enough started seedlings to matter if we could keep the lights and water stable. In operations, I changed oil on the microturbine under Claire's direction from the maintenance sheets. In medical, we packed what drugs remained into one clean cabinet and trashed anything compromised. In the dorm cluster, we chose 6 rooms to keep and shut the others to reduce cleaning, noise, and power load. Cress stayed bound for 1 cycle in a storage room beside command until we figured out what to do with him. He did not plead. He did not apologize. He asked for water twice and once requested access to the archive so he could prepare a statement for eventual review. Claire laughed at that in a short, ugly way I had not heard from her before. The decision on him had to be normal, not dramatic. No speech. No tribunal we were not qualified to run. No pretending we were a government, because we had a command console and a steel door. We took his weapons. We took the keys. We documented the files he tried to remove. Then we put him in one of the empty premium suites with food, water, a functioning toilet, and the door locked from the outside. Not forever. For now. Until we had the strength and the facts to decide something better than revenge. He hated that more than a beating. Not the confinement, the downgrade in authority. He became just another resident behind a door. By the 6th day, I finally went back to the surface through the south service stair. The property above looked both worse and more ordinary than I expected. The glass greenhouse block had taken storm damage from neglected vents. The main lab doors stood open with papers blown into the courtyard and dried leaves caught against the thresholds. Several bodies lay where the first panic had overtaken them. Beyond the fence, the service road was cluttered with stalled vehicles and loose trash. No large survivor group had found the place yet. No military rescue was coming up the hill. The world had not organized itself while we were underground cleaning up somebody else's selection process. I spent 2 hours outside moving anything useful toward the annex. Bottled water from a delivery van, hand tools, canned food from a break room, 2 boxes of shotgun shells with no shotgun to match, duct tape, tarps, gloves, a stack of contractor trash bags. I also found the upper greenhouse office and its paper files. Most were budgets and supply orders. Buried in one drawer, under pest control invoices, was a property permit packet filed under agricultural infrastructure exemptions. False on its face, but detailed enough to show that county reviewers had only seen the greenhouse and annex. The deeper structure had been hidden behind federal confidentiality language and private utility classifications. A legal shell wrapped around a secret built for permanent social sorting. When I came back below, Claire was sitting at the commons table with Naomi's badge laid beside a bowl of hydroponic greens we had harvested that morning. She had cleaned the table and set 2 plates because routine mattered more than appetite by then. She asked what I saw outside. I told her the truth. Roads jammed, property still quiet. No sign of rescue, no sign of order coming back by itself. She nodded and pushed 1 plate toward me. Then we make the place honest or we leave it. That was the first big decision we made together that did not come from fear or necessity. Honest. The word sat right between us. Not safe, not secure. Honest. It meant no hidden tears. No off-limits dining room while someone else got less air. No selective records. No lies about how many beds there were. If another living person ever came through that annex and passed quarantine, he or she would know exactly what this place had been and exactly what rules it would have now. So we wrote them down. Quarantine on entry, no exceptions. Shared inventory. Posted openly. Medical first by condition, not status. No locked sector with occupied rooms unless there is active infection threat and both of us agree. Every death logged by name if known. Every decision that changes access to air, water, medicine, or food recorded on paper and stored in duplicate. It was not a constitution. It was 2 tired survivors trying not to become the next version of the people who had built the place. A week after I found the annex, I took Cress's room key and went into the premium suite where we had kept him. He was sitting at the desk writing in one of the notepads we had left. He looked older, not weaker exactly. Just smaller without the command screens around him. "I want a copy of the records," he said before I even spoke. "No. You will need context if more residents arrive. There are no residents arriving from your roster." He set the pen down carefully. "You're using my facility." I looked around the suite, the filtered air, the sealed walls, the recessed lights, the furniture chosen by people who expected to live underground without surrendering comfort. "No," I said. "I'm using concrete, pumps, and pipes. The facility stopped being yours the minute you treated half the people in it as disposable." He stared at me for a long second, and then looked past my shoulder toward the corridor outside. "You think rules on paper change what people do under pressure?" "No," I said. "I think paper makes it harder to lie about what was done after." That was all. I locked the door again and left him with his notepad. Life in the complex settled into work because there was no other honest option. Mornings started with systems, pressure checks, nutrient levels, sump pumps, filter status, then food, harvest what was ready, start what could grow under existing light load, inventory dry stores. After that, clean up or salvage. Every sealed room we opened had to be handled carefully. Every new corridor gave us another piece of the story, whether we wanted it or not. We found a classroom set up for children in one side room off premium gallery, 6 desks, colored pencils, handwriting sheets. We found the separate dining pantry for sponsor residents, with imported coffee pods and vacuum-sealed steaks, while general dorms had powdered eggs and shelf-stable rice. We found sedatives in med carts logged against unnamed residents. We found Orr's body in a maintenance vestibule near the air handlers, still holding a wrench. Claire closed his eyes with 2 fingers and left his tool belt beside him until we were ready to move him properly. The infected outside remained a pressure on the walls without becoming the whole story. Once every couple of days, something on the surface drew a cluster to the fence line or the annex lot. On one supply run, I had to stay hidden behind a loading dock because 3 infected were circling a broken pallet wrapper 20 feet away, snapping at the flapping plastic each time the wind moved it. Another time, a living man came to the gate alone with both hands up and shouted for help. I watched him on the camera while Claire stood beside me in command. He said his wife was in the truck downhill and he needed antibiotics. He looked clean. He sounded desperate. We did not open. Not because we had become hard for the sake of it, but because we had no quarantine space ready beyond the main vestibule, and no way to know whether that truck held his wife or a group waiting for the gate to cycle. We stayed on the speaker and told him to leave his vehicle, move on foot south, and avoid the main road. He cursed us and left. I thought about him for hours after. Survival kept forcing the same question in different clothes. The only difference now was that we wrote the decisions down and admitted what they cost. Near the end of the second week, I climbed back into the annex stairwell after a supply run and caught myself listening to the hum below with something close to relief. That bothered me enough to sit down on the landing and stay there for a minute. The place had not become good because it was useful. It had become familiar. Familiarity is dangerous underground. It lets a person stop seeing the choices embedded in a building. I did not want to forget that every bulkhead around me had once been used against the people it claimed to protect. So I made one more record, not digital, paper. A binder stored in reception and duplicated in dorm commons. I wrote from the beginning. The corridor collapse. The hidden vent grills in the retaining wall. The annex. The sign above the decon glass. Claire in the filter room with the utility knife. South dorm mirror message. Cress in the motor pool packing records into a vehicle he planned to drive into a dead world. Claire added Naomi's name in her own handwriting under the section on South Dorm. Then she added Orr. Then a dozen more from badges and forms we had managed to match. Not enough, but more than silence. By the time the third week started, the complex no longer felt abandoned in the normal sense. It felt inherited against our will. That was different. The systems still ran because somebody had built them well. The halls still held the shape of a lie. Both facts were true at the same time. Claire worked the grow bays with a focus that made the light there feel earned instead of artificial. I handled the structural side, seals, drains, door motors, patching what the last occupants had damaged in their scramble to sort, hide, and flee. We ate at the commons table with the inventory board in plain sight. We kept one premium suite open only for quarantine overflow and left the rest shut because the furniture in those rooms came with too much memory attached. One evening, if it was evening, the surface cameras showed a line of smoke on the horizon west of the property and a dozen infected drifting across the lower road in and out of frame. Claire was transplanting basil starts. I was cleaning dust out of a motor housing. Nobody spoke for a while. The hum of the place held steady around us. Water moving where it should. Air turning over. Lights feeding green leaves under timers that still believed in tomorrow. Finally, Claire said, "This place was built for permanent lockdown." I kept working on the motor housing. "Yeah." She pressed soil around a seedling with 2 fingers. "Then it should have been built for permanent honesty, too." I looked across the grow bay at the rows of plants pushing upward under the lamps. Not because of hope, not because of symbolism, just because water and light and time still produced growth when the system let them. "It is now," I said. That was not optimism. It was work. The kind you do every day because the wall stays standing only if somebody checks the cracks. Because the water stays drinkable only if somebody changes the filters. Because people stay human only if somebody writes down what happened when others tried to become more important than the air in the room. I found the survival complex while running from the collapse above ground. But that was not the hardest part. The hardest part was understanding that the shelter had already failed before I ever opened the annex door. It failed the moment the people in charge decided some lives were structural and others were optional. Everything after that, the locked sectors, the missing logs, the bodies in worker dorms, the director's letter, Cress packing records into a utility vehicle, was just the building showing us what those decisions looked like in concrete. I still sleep in the same small dorm room off Blue Sector A, the one with the wardrobe braced against the wall and the mattress pulled low. Claire still keeps Naomi's badge in the pocket of her coveralls. Every few days I go up the south stair and scan the road through the fence for movement, human or infected, and then I come back down and log the pumps, the power, the water, and the doors. We have enough food to keep going for now. Enough seeds to stretch that if the systems hold. Enough paper left to record what this place was and what it is not allowed to become again. Outside, the world is still hostile in all the usual ways. Inside, the bulkheads are shut where they need to be. The records are back in the open, and every room we occupy belongs to the living by the same rule. No sponsorship tier, no hidden list, no clean language for dirty decisions.